When you think of Washington State, you might think of a lot of things. Seattle, pine forests, a diverse climate and culture. If you really want somewhere incredibly haunted, look no further than the Oxford Saloon located right in Snohomish. It is actually considered to be one of, if not the top haunted place in the entire state of Washington. It is so haunted that multiple groups of paranormal investigators have actually investigated this same location, and each have picked up on multiple EVP or electric voice phenomena. The saloon itself was built in the early 1900s, and of course, over the time of Seattle's growth and expansion, this saloon has seen a considerable amount of makeovers. Along with that, it's also seen more than its fair share of violence and death as well, which I believe adds a lot to the paranormal quality to it, and thus contributing it to being a supernatural hotspot, especially down in the basement. In fact, a very popular documented murder here is the death of a policeman who was actually a regular at this saloon and may or may have not worked as a bouncer on his off time. He is just one of the many entities seen wandering throughout the saloon. And of course, in the upper floors, people report seeing women walking around and men in bowler hats talking. People hear about voices echoing all throughout the saloon when nobody is there, and just a general sensation and feeling of unwanted. In fact, one of the more notorious ghosts to be seen is Madame Kathleen, where she supposedly committed horrendous acts to people and the people that worked for her. And the ghost of another girl named Amelia, who was supposedly forced into prostitution by Madame Kathleen. Her corpse was ultimately found in a closet on this property. And in fact, this saloon is still up and running today. You can actually go there and visit it right now if you wanted to. And because it's still receiving foot traffic, there have just been continuous report after continuous report of people experiencing all sorts of strange paranormal phenomena all throughout the saloon. From being pinched to being hit, to seeing dark apparitions darting in and out of corners, to apparitions going up the stairwell, to seeing things at the end of the hallways. In fact, one gentleman by the name of Darren had actually lived and worked in the apartment under a tavern right next door to the Oxford Saloon. This was in the mid-90s when, at the time, the saloon was currently being renovated by its, at the time, owners, Bill and Sarah. So, one evening, Darren was outside on his back porch of the back of the U&I Tavern, and at this time, it's about 2 in the morning, so he's sitting there smoking a cigarette, and he could clearly hear noises coming from next door in the Oxford Saloon. And to him, he was thinking, man, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. It sounds like there's quite a party going on. I mean, people are laughing and talking and just having an overall great time. But of course, you know, it being a saloon and whatnot and early in the morning, this isn't exactly unusual. So he's just thinking, man, this sounds like people are having fun. I want to go become a part of that. And Darren already knew everybody that had worked there, so he figured maybe it was just a little after-hours get-together where people were just enjoying each other's company. So Darren puts his cigarette out, walks down the breezeway, and walks up the stairs to the door. And Darren could plainly see a sliver of light coming from underneath the door and shadows very clearly moving back and forth around. I mean, there's clearly people in there having a good time. I mean, he could hear them, and now he could actually see that somebody was in there. So he knocks, and he was met with silence. He's like, well, that's odd. So he knocks again, and there was no response from the inside. He then proceeds to go down the stairs a little bit and actually tries to look under the door. But he could see that where there was now a sliver of light, it's now darkness. Nothing. There's no sounds, nothing. And he's left thinking there to himself, well, that's odd. I just heard at least half a dozen people in there, what sounded like having a good time. So he heads back up the stairs and proceeds onto the sidewalk of First Street, where he sees no cars. I mean, it's dead. It's 2:30 in the morning. There's not a soul around. He thinks this to be very strange. And he's confused because there's no lights on in the Oxford Saloon. So he's thinking, okay. So the following morning, he goes on over to the Oxford Saloon for breakfast and had made a mention of this to Bill, who was the current owner, and was like, hey, it sounded like you had quite the party going on last night about 2:30 in the morning. And Bill just looked at him saying, no, there was nobody here. We actually closed early last night at 11 p.m. Everything was shut down and locked. The motion detectors and cameras were all set. Nothing was ever tripped or turned off until they opened this morning. Darren had no way to explain what he had experienced the night before, but could only chalk it up to disembodied spirits of partiers and those who have previously visited the saloon but never checked out. Black Diamond Cemetery. It is one of the most haunted locations in all of Washington State and actually used to be a burial ground long before it had ever turned into a cemetery. This cemetery has all the makings of a haunted, traditional, stereotypical place. People have reported seeing floating orbs at night, or strange, ghastly apparitions moving in the background behind tombstone to tombstone. But the reportings don't stop there. People have also talked about hearing disembodied voices and cries and giggles of everything from children to adults, when clearly there is nobody there to account for. For me personally, the most disturbing report about the cemetery is seeing the sight of a swinging lantern going back and forth in the cemetery. Again, with nobody to account for. That's some Hollywood tier ghost sighting kind of stuff here. What's also very interesting about the Black Diamond Cemetery is that it holds a very diverse amount of people, from Russians to Italians and Australians, while also featuring several people from the smallpox and influenza epidemic back in the 1920s, as well as a host of miners who have died. Erecting back in 1884, this was the go-to spot to dump dead miners. It spans a whopping 3.5 acres and has well over 1,200 bodies. For a lot of people, this cemetery is home to many of the miners who had passed on years and years ago. But I think perhaps of all the most disturbing sighting is the apparition of a white horse sometimes seen wandering the confines of the cemetery. And while there have been numerous paranormal investigations done by several different researchers, nothing definitive was ever found. In fact, a group known as the Cascadia Paranormal Investigators had attempted to, at one point or another, try and debunk some of the spookier things happening within the cemetery. However, there were a few things that couldn't exactly easily be explained. This paranormal group had actually employed the use of a spirit box, and to their astonishment actually got some responses back. And they brought another device that reads up on local EMF patterns, in which they picked up more words that everything led to violence. And the entire time, the team had complained about the feeling of being uncomfortable and feeling like they were being watched by someone or something. Is this a place you would ever go? Definitely not me. The Tacoma Old City Hall has been a place of haunting after haunting since at least the mid-1970s. According to local town legends in Tacoma, police were called to investigate several disturbances within this building back in 1974, including various noises going on inside and lights flickering on and off, intruder alarms and fire alarms all sounding off. Just strange, unusual behavior. Of course, when the police went to investigate, they didn't find anything. But this wasn't just a one-off occurrence. This happened over the course of several days and months and even years, with police turning up nothing and no explanation for these strange happenings. In fact, it was theorized at one point that the noises could be attributed to somebody breaking into the building. However, with a lack of evidence and the fact that this was going on multiple times, pretty much disprove that. And even to this day, there is still no logical explanation for these noises that have been happening ever since the mid-70s. However, strange occurrences and hauntings go back farther than the mid-1970s. Constructed in 1893, this Italian Renaissance-style building was designed by a San Francisco architect by the name of E.A. Hatherton. And all the way up to 1959, this city hall actually had an entire jail in its basement. And we all know what comes along with prisoners and jails and the violence and negative energy that brings along, so maybe that has a part to play in it. But in 1959, this building was in desperate need of some TLC and much needed repairs and renovation, which the county and city at the time just did not have. So instead of allocating the money needed to repair the city hall, they just decided to go ahead and move the building, or at least the offices within the building altogether. And for over 10 years, this building just stood there vacant as a potential fixer-up for any investor who wanted to jump in on the opportunity. And this old town hall was nearly torn down, but fortunately, in 1974, it was saved, being placed on the National Registry of Historic Places, which in turn actually got it some attention and interest to do things with it, but no businesses or nonprofits really came forward with enough funds to really give the building what it needed. And throughout the coming years, there would be businesses, bars and grills, restaurants that would move in and out throughout its time. And at one point or another, I should say at its high point, it actually had around 40 businesses and restaurants operating within this old town hall. Even though this building is rich with history, as much of the surrounding area, Tacoma, and the entire Puget Sound is, this building appears to host an entity by the name of Gus, who does doesn't necessarily seem nefarious, but likes the attention of the living. He would do things like you hear in a typical haunted house, like knocking over bottles and making clangs and slamming doors. Just things along that nature, things that couldn't be explained right away. And then there are those who have reported seeing entities of security guards going in and out of the elevator shafts. From lights turning on and off to previous tenants seeing these dark, ominous shadows going down the hall and going right through the walls, disappearing completely. These ones freak tenants out a little more than usual, mainly due in part to their ominous presence. People have also reported feeling a strange sensation sometimes when walking all throughout the halls. Everything from an unseen force wisping past them at high speeds and feeling the air and the energy come by you, to feeling like you should not be, and feeling like you are watched. With a place as ancient as this one, it's no surprise that there are still some visitors lingering. The historic Everett Theater, which still actually stands to this day, and is located on 2911 Colby Avenue, Everett, Washington 98201. It had its grand opening in 1901 as the Everett Opera House and was a pretty big deal at the time. And during its time, it had housed some of the biggest names in entertainment in the early 20th century, like George Cohan, the Marx Brothers, and of course, Fatty Arbuckle. But even with a rich history, things didn't start to really propel towards the supernatural until around 1993, where renovations really ramped up. I'm not saying that in 1993, all of a sudden it became haunted. I'm just saying that reports weren't really popular, and if they were, they weren't really vocalized by anybody. But it was during this section of renovations in the early to mid-90s that many people began to describe strange feelings around the entire theater. Everything from being watched to feeling dread. Doors mysteriously slamming shut and then opening again. And there's one particular instance where a staff member was leaving the projection room where the door would just not close. He kept trying to close it, but it just kept flinging back open, and he had no way to really explain why. It was as if there was some unforeseen force not letting him close it. Upset by this, he had tried to use more physical force to keep it closed when the door would just swing back, hit him in the chest, and knock him down. Another witness during the course of this period of renovation had apparently seen a sweater levitate off the floor, move around, and then fall back down again, as if some invisible puppeteer was controlling it and decided to drop it. People have also reported seeing a mysterious man watching them through windows and staring at them down the hallways, getting a really creepy feeling like they should not be there, as if this man was there to do them harm. And of course, just like all the other locations, people have experienced seeing strange apparitions, shadow people, really bad energy moving all throughout the theater, and the random feeling of dread coming on and hitting people. As I've already said, this was primarily noted in the early to mid-90s renovation, but is still felt by people today. And as a matter of fact, just like the Oxford Saloon, this is still operating and up and running today as a venue that you can visit anytime. And I bet if you get a chance to poll any of the current staff aside, they'll each have their own terrifying experiences of their own to tell you. It seems that almost everybody who has worked here, or at least who works here, has an experience or a story to share. Be sure to let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. I would love to hear from it. What are some places that you know that are incredibly haunted? If you enjoyed this video, be sure to go ahead and smack that like button. And also, if you're new to the channel, be sure to go ahead and hit the big old red subscribe button down here and keep your notifications turned on, so that way YouTube will let you know every time I release a great new video, and hopefully help me get over this cold. I love you all, keep an open mind, and I'll see you guys in the very next video.